So what if I told you that you should be paying attention to managing your boss just as much as you pay attention to managing your team members? Yup, managing up or managing your boss is actually just one of the keys to making your life so much easier as a manager, but only if you do it right. Which is why learning how to manage up is so crucial. So in this video, I'm going to show you what managing up is, and by the way, it's probably not what you think, the signs that you need to be managing up, and how to do it the right way so that you don't end up causing friction or tension with your boss. So have you ever been in a situation where maybe priorities are shifting from one week to another and you're constantly having to reallocate resources, adjust timelines, and re-strategize to keep up with the changing demands? Or have you ever been tasked with implementing something only to have your manager question every decision, insist on reviewing every piece of communication, and then randomly start attending your team meetings? Well, these are just two of the many places where managing up is something that would come into play. Now, in these situations, you might feel like the best thing for you to do is just give in. Because after all, right, they're the boss, right? They're the ones calling the shots. But what about if instead of taking a disempowered approach by just sitting back and allowing this stuff to happen to you, what if instead you started to manage the situation? So for example, let's say you do have a boss that tends to shift priorities on you. Well, you can do two things. Number one, approach them, right? And say, I'd love to make sure that we're aligned on the top priorities for this week. Can we quickly review the list and just make sure I'm focusing my energy and my team's energy in the right place? And then afterwards, right, after the two of you work things out, just follow up with some documentation and just say, I've put together a revised timeline based on the new priorities we've discussed. I'd like to share it with you and use it as a living document between the both of us to make sure that it continues to meet your expectations. Do you see what we did there? We took a situation that could have seemed really frustrating and we turned it into a situation where now we have some control of the situation. And we did all of this by managing up. You see, managing up is simply the process of making sure that you are consistently aligned with your manager on the expectations and outcomes. Now, before we go any further, I want to address a couple of concerns that I've heard over the years from my students inside the new Manager Accelerator program as it relates to managing up. So sometimes when I bring this up, right, and I say, y'all, you need to manage up, they'll be like, but Mac, what if they don't take it well? Or isn't this just gonna make me look like I don't have my stuff together? Or why in the world do I need to be managing my boss? Isn't it their job to manage me? Well, hear me when I say that these are valid concerns and questions. So let's take those concerns and questions one at a time, starting with retaliation. So if you fear retaliation, then I'm gonna be honest and just tell you, right, that depending on your manager, there is a very real chance that you might undergo some retaliation, because I hate to say it, but some people are just not emotionally mature enough to receive feedback. But what I will also say is that it's not always the case, and you actually have more control of the outcome than you think by simply tweaking your approach. So while you might not be able to control their reaction, you can definitely control how you approach the situation, which is something that we will talk about a little bit upcoming. Secondly, if you fear that by surfacing your concerns, you're going to be perceived as incompetent, then I need you to know that if you are effectively asserting your needs, that's not a sign of incompetence, it's a sign of competence, okay? Because someone that just takes and never speaks up when they should is actually seen as someone that is a pushover, and that's not what you want. And then third, and this one I hear enough, right, which is, well, Mac, it's just not my job, right? They should be managing me. Obviously, some of that is true, but it is your job to stay aligned with your manager and to have a good working relationship with them so that you can get the support you need, so that your team can be successful. So that's why you need to take it seriously and do it effectively. If your manager is not aware of what or why you're doing what you're doing, you need to manage up. If there is some friction towards getting to the results, if the relationship is strained, if the priorities and expectations keep shifting on you, if you're unclear on what you need to be focused on, if you're being micromanaged or macromanaged, that's a sign that you need to be managing up. Like, all of these things are signs that you need to be managing up. So if you're in that place where you've identified that you need to manage up, the question is how, right? How do you manage up in a way that keeps you aligned, makes your job easier, and doesn't create a costly situation for you? Because we don't want that, right? Well, let's start by talking about what not to do or how not to do it, because I think it's actually a very easy thing to do wrong. So number one, it is not undermining or going around your manager. For example, have you ever felt, let's say, frustrated with your manager's lack of understanding or responsiveness, so you went directly to their boss to try and get something approved or just to speed up the process? Well, this might seem like a quick fix, but it can seriously damage the relationship that you have with your manager because they might easily feel undermined and lose that trust and respect that they have for you. So the question is, what do you do instead, right? If you have a manager that is not as responsive as they should be or that, you would like them to be. Well, first, you want to invite some empathy into the situation because they're most likely carrying a heavy load themselves, right? Just like you have a lot going on, so do they. So try and invite some empathy and then take action by expressing your concern directly to them about the response times. And then aim to try and collaborate with them on the best way forward so that you get what you want and need in a timely fashion while also considering their constraints. The second wrong way to manage up is by blaming or shifting responsibility for your failures onto your manager. So let's say your manager gives you some feedback that a project could have been handled better. Right? You would not want to respond by saying, well, I appreciate the feedback, but I put everything I had into this and I truly believe that I did the best with the resources and time that I had available. Can you spot the issue with this? Well, while on the surface, the response seems polite, there is just an underlying tone of defensiveness, right? This response screams, your expectations were unreasonable and given the constraints I did well, right? Thus, just subtly shifting the blame away. Now, I'm never going to be the one that tells you that you shouldn't speak your mind or not speak the truth and call a spade, but I'm always going to remind you that the way you do this can significantly impact the outcome. So instead, I want you to take ownership of your part and focus on finding solutions rather than assigning blame, right? If external factors contributed to what ended up happening, clearly and with objectivity, communicate that, right? Just stay away from accusatory language. And if the expectations were unreasonable, say that. And look for ways that the two of you can become better aligned on the expectations and any constraints at the very beginning before you start. Because honestly, the truth is, if the expectations were unreasonable, it was actually your job to speak up and say that in the first place. The third wrong way to manage up is by expecting your manager to solve all your problems. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt overwhelmed and unsure and just popped into your manager's office for them to figure things out for you? Well, while on the surface, this might not seem like an issue, it can also stem from a lack of confidence in your role. So what you can do instead is work on actively developing the skills with which you're feeling shaky in, right? Your manager is likely busy and doesn't have time to be investing this level of development into you, not at your level. So you have to actually take your own career into your hands and upskill yourself. And a great first place for you to start is in my free training where I break down the 5 pillars of my Elevate Team Performance Framework, which is kind of like a roadmap to helping you become an effective leader that builds a high performance team. So if you know you got some gaps that need filling, head over to makitaandrews.com/training or just click the link in the description box below to sign up for free. Now, the fourth wrong way to manage up is by being overly agreeable. Do you tend to just do whatever your manager tells you to do, even if you don't agree? Do you move on things without offering your own perspective when maybe it's actually different from theirs? Of course, this is also maybe a signal that you lack confidence or maybe you misunderstand your role a little bit, but all around, this is just an indicator that you're not managing up. So instead, learn to communicate your workload, your perspective, as well as your capacity. Because the truth is, your manager expects you to own your work and then to contribute your insights, even if they're different than theirs, right? They don't want you to just agree with everything they've said. Now, I'm aware that sometimes it can feel like you're completely powerless when you're a middle manager. Maybe you don't even feel like you can push back or say no or share your insights. And if that's you, then I want you to watch this video here next.